And that's the reason why we just need to wait for the deliberation and the decision of the advisory board, and then what the FDA will do in taking that recommendation or not. So there's still a lot ahead, even though we have one element of the decision, not the decision, but the recommendation and the vote, which, as I mentioned, it's not totally surprising. I think the critical issue is at what age will be the cutoff, if any.
And based on the research and the studies you've seen from Israel and elsewhere, Dr. Fauci, would you recommend a booster shot for the older cohort, which they still might vote on here?
You know, I have publicly said that looking at the data from Israel, that I would be in favor of boosters. I'm not going to give you my age group that I would, because I don't want to get ahead of the advisory committee at the time that they're deliberating. I think that would be inappropriate. We have a good group there. I'm very interested to see what their vote is. So I really would like to respectfully refrain from making an age prediction.
But so didn't you advise President Biden to announce booster shots, which he did several weeks ago, and actually targeted next week for Americans to get their boosters?
No, that's incorrect. What we said that we need to plan in case the FDA and the CDC make a recommendation. We said we need to plan and be ready at the week of September the 20th. One of the things that often gets misinterpreted, that we made no decision. We said that we feel that there would be a likelihood that we would need boosters, and if so, we need to be prepared, because you can't just snap your finger when a decision comes and have all the parties that would be involved in implementing the rollout. But in every statement, including the statement that we all signed out on, myself, my colleagues, the Surgeon General, the Director of NIH, the Acting Commissioner of FDA, all of them, and the people from the various agencies that were involved in the discussion, we always said, provided and under the condition that the FDA give a regulatory decision about what can be done. And that's the beauty of the situation, because that's what's going on right now. We're in a deliberative mode, and we will, I guess, by the end of this day, have an answer as to what the advisory committee will recommend. So there's no incompatibility with what went on. It was always contingent on what the FDA would be deciding.
Dr. Fauci, I'm wondering about what goes in, all the inputs that would go into a recommendation, whether by the FDA and then by the administration, to getting booster shots. Is it purely a matter of, does the science suggest that there is effectiveness to adding booster protection that outweighs the risk, if there is any incremental risk? Or is there a messaging consideration here about, will it encourage more people to just in general get vaccinated? Will it discourage some people from the idea, well, if I need boosters, I'm not going to get my initial vaccination? Is it just about what the numbers tell you, or are there other concerns?
Well, it really is mostly a risk-benefit ratio. The one thing we do know is that in the clinical studies, some that we've done here, the Israelis have done far more, that when you give a third boost, you dramatically increase the protection. And the case that they looked at, they dramatically increase the protection against infection and in some respects against severe disease. So we know that boosters can do that. No doubt there's data. The recommendation of to whom to give it to will always be a risk-benefit ratio. We know that the risk of the mRNA, which is the vaccine in question now with Pfizer, has a very rare adverse event that did not prevent the recommendation for that vaccine for younger people at 2 doses. So the question that the advisory committee is considering and looking at what age is that risk of this rare adverse event which was rare enough as to not preclude at all the recommendation for the 2 doses, what is the risk of that in a certain age group for the people who might be getting a 3rd dose? And that's what they're going to be talking about right now. How far down in the age group, if you make a recommendation for a boost, and I'm not going to get ahead of them to anticipate that, but if they make a recommendation for a 3rd boost, at what age cutoff will they do that? I think that's the issue that's being discussed now. It doesn't really have much to do with the messaging. If you give a boost, will you get people feeling that they shouldn't get the first shot to begin with? I don't think that's the case, to be honest with you. It really is fundamentally a benefit versus risk ratio.
What about the 1 million people or so in this country, Dr. Fauci, that have already gotten a booster, whether they were qualified for it or not? I know a lot of people anecdotally who have just already done it because they've looked at the studies themselves, and they're looking at Israel and they're talking to other people and they want to protect themselves.
Right. Well, people are doing that, and people will do that because a lot of that data has become public. Again, people do that. It is not advised to do that until you get the approval from our regulatory authorities. But people, can look at this and make a risk-benefit type of decision for themselves individually. But we would hope that people would wait until you get the imprimatur from the regulatory agencies. But you're absolutely correct. We all know of many people who've done that. There is one group that we want to make sure there's no confusion about. Those who are immune compromised have already been cleared to get the 3rd dose. Those are people who are transplant patients who are receiving immunosuppressive therapy, cancer patients who are on chemotherapy, autoimmunity patients who are receiving immune compromising doses of immunosuppressive agents. That's already a done deal. Those people can and should be getting the 3rd boost. The others are just what I mentioned with regard to a risk-benefit ratio that is always under consideration.
I still don't quite understand, Dr. Fauci, and I would think it would play into this decision at some point why U.S. government, why the CDC isn't collecting and publishing data on breakthrough cases, aside from hospitalizations and deaths. Is it because they don't want to alarm people or dissuade people from getting the vaccine because they might see that it doesn't protect you, the vaccines don't protect you from getting the infection? Certainly the benefit is there with hospitalizations and deaths, but there are breakthrough cases all over the place.
Yeah, there are breakthrough cases. And again, the CDC is not doing something or doing something because of a concern about alarming. That's not the case. That what they do is based on science. They will be now collecting more data on breakthrough cases that are not symptomatic and that don't go to the hospital. That is now being done in different areas of their cohorts.
Do you have any explanation for why the numbers on Israel continue to look worse? They're now at the highest level of cases that they have ever been in any surge for a population that's 80% vaccinated and has administered the most booster shots. How do you explain that? And what can we learn from that so we don't follow that path as we have been following in this trajectory of the disease?
Yeah, they are having cases and breakthrough cases. I think people need to understand, and it is understandably confusing, that when you get a very large proportion of your population that's vaccinated, when you have a vaccine that is not 100% protective, as no vaccine is, and particularly when the vaccine was designed and in the clinical trials that proven its efficacy, did not prove its efficacy against infection. It approved its efficacy against clinically apparent disease. So the Israelis are about a month or more ahead of us in every aspect, temporally, not necessarily quality, but temporally. And they do very good work, I must say that. And what they have is they have a larger proportion of their population fully vaccinated than we do. We're close behind, but they have a larger proportion. when you have such a fully vaccinated portion of your population, you will get breakthrough infections because of the reason I just mentioned. The vaccines are not 100%. But what they're showing is very clearly, and what we show too, that people who are vaccinated, when they do get a breakthrough infection, what happens is that it is much more highly likely that that will not be a serious outcome, that it will either be an asymptomatic infection or a mildly to moderately symptomatic, usually mildly. The other thing that's important is that Israel has a healthcare delivery system quite different than ours. They have, I believe, 4 or maybe 5 HMOs in which all the data are easily accessible. So they are picking up breakthrough infections that are essentially non-symptomatic, because when someone comes in for another reason, they'll get a test. So they know more about breakthrough infections. So when you see the number of cases that are going up despite booster and despite a primary vaccination regimen that they got with 2 doses, remember, they're following very carefully even asymptomatic individuals. So that makes a difference there.
Dr. Anthony Fauci, very, very good to have you, especially as this news has been unfolding. Thank you so much for your time.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
All right, coming up, Invesco reportedly in talks to merge with State Street's asset management business. We'll dive into what that deal could look like next in the Market Zone.